Some of you might ask yourself why I'm sitting here, because I'm not an expert. I've never worked on German-Israeli questions and history, but I was involved in the project that is at stake here to serve as an outsider in regard to questions of oral history, both in regard to conducting and interpreting interviews. And I'm very grateful to still be invited here. I feel really honored, and I'm happy to chair this session. Yesterday, I think, was a day of multiple contextualizations of this project. Embedding the research project both in depth and in breadth, and thus pointing to the enormous complexity that I think the project will have to deal with. First, in depth, by pointing to a long prehistory that goes back into the Weimar Republic with your talk, for instance. And also in depth, in another sense, that refers to the various actors involved. What might look from the outside as purely scholarly exchange and cooperation was actually, I think that would be my starting question at least, was actually taking place on a stage which was full of personal memories, family histories, projections, anxieties, longings, resentments, and perhaps also euphoria. And I think it was very good of Gabriel Motzkin to tell the German ministry that the project was about the impact of the exchange program that brought on the way together with the Israeli counterparts in the 1970s. But we all know that impact involves a lot more than just something that you can easily observe. And so I'm really looking forward to the project. I'm very happy to be some part of it, but I think it will also be a really difficult project. I don't think it'll be easy, and that's the good thing about it too. And in breadth, I think we have a good contextualization yesterday, because when it comes to the humanities, language, as was pointed out yesterday, is a central tool and object, and it is the German language. On the one hand, the German language has become, at the time when this exchange began or was put on the way, for many has become an embarrassment. On the other, it marks a loss and a hope to regain or preserve German language for one's own work. Which brings me to the session today, because our morning session takes place under the heading of Preliminary Models, Contexts in the Sciences. And I'm very curious to learn why and how the sciences were the first to be chosen for scholarly exchange. And thinking of what we discussed yesterday, the question, is obvious. Was it possible because the sciences promised a type of exact knowledge that put them in a certain way outside of history, while the humanities, on the contrary, produce a very different type of knowledge, a knowledge that is very much language-based on the one hand, but also is a knowledge that produces with itself meaning. And I think these are really very, very important differences, although I'm not want to be taken as naive in regard to the natural sciences, but I'm sure that at the time when those exchanges began in Israel, one might have thought of both as very, very different. And the other question that I think will be touched at in this session is, in what way did the exchange in science indeed serve as a model for the preparation of the exchange in the humanities? We can look forward to very interesting speakers, and I'm sure very interesting papers. And I would like to begin with the first speaker. Pardon?
Make it short. I'd rather talk longer.
Yeah. Well, this is really a double bind. No, I think you gave me very good information, so we want to really know you, okay? Ute Deichmann, Professor Dr. Ute Deichmann is the founding director of the Jacques Loeb Center for the History and Philosophy of the Life Sciences, Ben Gurion University of the Negev, Beersheva. She published, and she's well known for the two books that dealt with science in Nazi Germany. One was published in 1996, Biologists Under Hitler. The other one, Chemists and Biochemists in the Nazi Era, published in German in 2001. She also published numerous papers on science and scientists in Nazi Germany and their forced emigration. Her current research is on various topics related to the history and philosophy of modern life sciences, where she published numerous papers and co-edited several volumes, most recently Synthetic Life, Scientific, Historical and Ethical Perspectives, and the Changing Concept of the Gene, Recurrent Debates on the Causal Role of genes. Deichmann also received several prizes, and here I will only mention one because I was asked to shorten it. This is the Gmelin-Beilstein Medal for the Society of German Chemists in 2005. Ute Deichmann, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes.
Tell me 5 minutes before, please.
I will.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And Professor Motzkin and Sharon, I thank you very much for inviting me to this session on as a, let's say, guest speaker, as a historian of the natural sciences in this symposium. Yes, I am talking about the early Israeli-German collaboration in the sciences, and I also look for potential implications for the humanities. Since I have 20 minutes, I don't give any introduction. I start, and I have 8 short points. So, first one, German scientists' international isolation after the Second World War. After the First World War, the Western Allies imposed a far-reaching boycott against German science and the humanities. However, after the Second World War, for various reasons I can't go into now, they refrained from doing so. However, there was no normalcy in the scientific relationships with Germany. For example, German scientists were often included from international conferences. Many scientists from other countries and Jewish scientists were reluctant to visit Germany. And this isolation severely affected German science, especially newly developing sciences such as molecular biology, also in physical chemistry, and so on. Israel was special. It was the only country to impose an official, complete cultural boycott on Germany. And this was explained by Hanan Baron from the Foreign Ministry. He pointed us to the depth of the abyss that prevailed in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. And, for example, that all passports, Israeli passports, were marked valid for all countries with the exclusion of Germany, and visits by Israeli nationals to Germany and the opposite were not thought of at the time. And this brings me to my second point. Who were the initiators? And that was asked several times yesterday. Who were the initiators of the Israeli-German cooperation? What were their motives and approaches? And in particular, what made the Israeli scientists break the boycott and start to prepare a large-scale collaboration? Just to clarify a few things, the collaboration was not initiated by the Max Planck Society or by German scientists who wanted to revive the fruitful collaboration with their former German Jewish colleagues who had been expelled. This fruitful collaboration was never restored. German scientists or their institutions never acknowledged that the dismissals in 1933 were an injustice, and at least per forma made them reverse them. And those German Jewish scientists who came to Israel as scientists did not participate in the early collaboration. One of them was Ernst David Bergmann, an eminent chemist at the Hebrew University at the time, who had plenty of scientific relationships with France, but he even refused to speak German except with his mother. The collaboration was initiated by chemist Gerhard Schmidt from the Weizmann Institute. And this is a very interesting story, which I cannot tell you now, just the following. He had a non-Jewish father who was a professor of chemistry at the University of Munich, and he had been a Nazi party member in 1933. And Gerhard, after the war, he emigrated with his mother to England in 1935 and never came despite the urging of his father, never came to visit him in Germany. Only in 1956, after he had become full professor, he came for the first visit. And his father introduced him to many chemists, and he suggested to his son that he meet nuclear physicist Wolfgang Gentner because he was politically above any reproach. Gentner was at the time research director at CERN, and 2 years later he became university professor in Heidelberg and also director of the Max Planck Institute for Nuclear Physics. And his political and humane behavior in occupied France was internationally known, and he was clearly not a Nazi. And Schmidt, after meeting with Gentner, Schmidt suggested or even urged his colleague from the Weizmann Institute, who happened to be at CERN at the same time, Amos de Shalit, a nuclear physicist of the first generation of physicists from the Hebrew University. He was trained by Racah, who was a refugee from Italy, and he was a founding director of the Department of Nuclear Physics, and he urged him to visit Gentner at CERN in his office, which Amos de Shalit did. And this exchange, as the later president of the Weizmann Institute, Chaim Hariri, said, this exchange between Wolfgang Gentner and Amos de Shalit was to lay the foundations of the scientific collaboration between the two countries. Okay, we have three scientists who were highly motivated, and I'm now talking about what motivated them. First, Gerhard Schmidt. He wanted, as I said yesterday, to cooperate with German chemists when German synthetic organic chemistry was still internationally leading, one of the few fields where it kept this stand after the war. And he wanted in particular to establish connections to chemical industry because industry in Israel was still largely based on agricultural products. And Gerhard Schmidt made for decades strong efforts regarding the furthering of translational chemistry in Israel. De Shalit was, from scratch, he was very internationally oriented, and he had been in Berkeley before, in Princeton, I think, not Berkeley, and other places in CERN, and he anticipated. I didn't have the chance to talk to him because he died long ago, but I talked to students of his, and they said he anticipated that the connections to Germany could be extended sometime to Europe. And he wanted also to help young German scientists because, this was Hanoch Gutfreund told me yesterday, he believed Ben-Gurion that there was a new Germany. And he made it very clear he wanted to work with a new generation and not with the Nazis. So both of them, of course, wanted to enhance research infrastructure, such as instrumentation at the Weizmann Institute, and to gain financial support, which was crucial at the time. It was even that some research projects had to be cancelled because of lack of funding. Israel was in a very poor economic situation, whereas Germany already West Germany already benefited from the Marshall Plan and had funds available. Gentner, he wanted to overcome the international isolation of German science, and he talked, for example, about the boredom in the science enterprise of today in Germany, and also the constraints, for example, on atomic research, which was imposed by the Allied Control Council laws. And so these were the three people, and they knew, and that was very clear yesterday, that they had to receive political backing and also to overcome strong opposition at the Weizmann Institute if they wanted to succeed. So, and in the next 2 years, they succeeded to receive political support, and here were a number of other people involved, also a fascinating story which I cannot go into now, just to mention the names: Joseph Kohn, the European representative of the Weizmann Institute, Danny Heinemann, a businessman, American businessman who helped Adenauer when he was dismissed from his office financially, and Adenauer never forgot the help he received once from Danny Heinemann. And so finally Adenauer and Ben-Gurion agreed to the cooperation, Ben-Gurion on condition that it would not be, that it be kept secret or not public. So the first step, the next step was that with Adenauer's help, the Israeli scientists and Kohn met with representatives of German industry, headed by Hermann Abs. I mean, historians know which role he played in the Nazi era. But these meetings were altogether not very successful regarding the support of bilateral science collaboration. And as a next step, Gentner, again with political backing, arranged a meeting between Kohn and the president of the Max Planck Society, which was Otto Hahn at the time, and that was in mid or late 1959. And they agreed that the cooperation might be very good, and they agreed that the German delegation visit the Weizmann Institute. This plan, however, again met with strong objection from the executive board of the Weizmann Institute and clearly also of faculty. They were afraid that the receiving funds from an institution which was involved in the Holocaust would damage the reputation of the Weizmann Institute, and there were fierce discussions. Finally, though, it was accepted. And only then the involvement of the Max Planck Institute started, so it was quite the last step. And so this delegation came in December 1959, and it was Hahn, Feodor Lynen, and Wolfgang Gentner. And to the role of Otto Hahn, he is well known for his discovery of nuclear fission, together with Lise Meitner and Strassmann, for which he received alone the Nobel Prize, which was later accepted as a mistake. He epitomized the good German. He was not a Nazi, clearly not. But he was criticized strongly by emigre Jewish scientists because he took a new nationalist stand after the Second World War as a president of the Max Planck Society and for some other reasons. But in Israel, he didn't have any problems. And his motives for supporting the collaboration was to improve Germany's and the Max Planck Institute's international standing, which was indeed severely damaged. Feodor Lynen, biochemist, he was also a clear anti-Nazi, and he kept relations with his Jewish colleagues throughout the war as much as was possible. And he wanted the young biochemists to again get access to more modern research than what happened in Germany. So they reached a financial agreement and also political agreement. However, its implementation was delayed. I should say something. They met in December 1959, and it was all in a big rush. And the reason was that Hahn was to be president until 1960, and he would be replaced by Adolf Butenandt. And everybody knew that Butenandt was politically not acceptable, and Butenandt never visited Israel, though he tried very much to be invited, but he was never invited. So the things had to be done before. And so the implementation of this agreement was delayed by the administration of the Max Planck Society for various reasons. And in the meantime, there was some funding from the German government, and in particular from the VW Foundation. And so there were already some visits, for example, by Gerhard Schmidt. But then in 1964, the first Minerva agreement was reached. And the Minerva Foundation became the legal basis for the funding of the collaboration, and the money came entirely from the German government. When we look at the first projects, and I interviewed a number of people, and I can't talk about this now, but just we look into the subjects the project were in, that was nuclear physics, chemical crystallography, and immunochemistry. So it was all more or less hard sciences. And there was, for example, no projects in genetics, human genetics, or physical anthropology. And some of that did not take place at the Weizmann Institute, but I think nobody would have collaborated with Germans in these fields. And we can just make the transition to the humanities, deeply ideologized fields certainly were not the ones which started the collaboration. I want to say a few words about the moral costs of the collaboration before I come to the benefits. So I see two aspects. The first was the acceptance of a high-ranking Israeli institution as a partner so early after the Second World War helped the Max Planck Society and its leadership to appear politically rehabilitated. And I think the examination of the Nazi pasts of German scientists, and in particular the Max Planck Society, was delayed in part because of this collaboration. Second, unlike what the Israeli proponents explicitly intended, in particular Amos de Shalit, also Talmi and others, the collaboration did not only include scientists who were anti-Nazis or were young, but because it was simply impossible. I mean, I mentioned Hermann Abs, there was Globke, without whom nothing would happen. And in the Max Planck Society, there was Ernst Telschow, who was a fierce Nazi and anti-Semite and a student of Otto Hahns, and he kept his high position later on. So there was nothing that could be done without these Nazis, and that was a price that had to be paid. And there are many Israeli scientists, and I have quotations of that, was believed in myths which were created by German scientists that many leading figures heroically resisted National Socialism. And it was already known at the time that this was a myth in some cases, and it became known later, became well documented later on. So, to the benefits, and my own evaluation is the benefits simply outweigh the costs. So for Israel, there were clearly the material benefits in the beginning very, very important. For example, 65, the collaborative projects amounted to about 20% of the Weizmann Institute's activities. We should remember that most of the international relations were with the United States. And so 20% is a very, very high amount for this early stage. And as anticipated by Amos de Shalit, Israeli scientists created strong ties with Europe and the European funding organizations like the ERC or Horizon 2020. I mean, they are very, very active in these fields. And Israeli postdoctoral fellows were and are exposed to a very different scientific culture. And this was told to me or emphasized by Steve Weiner, now structural biologist at the Weizmann Institute, who has many contacts to Germany. And he said they have a chance to study the beneficial effects of efficient organization of research in Germany. Okay, I leave it as such. Yeah, I liked it. Just another statement. I asked Uzi Smilansky, a physicist from the Weizmann Institute, so why in nuclear physics Israel had already good connections to France. Why was German science important, though it was still so weak at the time? And he said the good relations with France already changed in the late 1960s, and Germany was building up its scientific strength, and there were centers in nuclear physics in Heidelberg with scientists like Jensen, he was a Nobel laureate of 1965, and Weidenmüller, and Karlsruhe, Frankfurt, Bonn, Munich, and it was clear that German science would go forward. And it was also the peak of the economic miracle. So there were some clear reasons to go on in this direction. For Germany, so I'm talking now about the benefits of the young scientists, and it was mainly young scientists who visited, I mean for longer periods of time, who visited in the beginning the Weizmann Institute, later some other institutions. And they clearly benefited from the international atmosphere and a less hierarchical way of conducting science. That is what all the German scientists told me. These discussions at the Weizmann Institute, it was something they never heard of or they never experienced, and most of them came from Heidelberg at the time. And they also made personal friendships. And a second reason, which I think was very, very important, they were able to make international contacts again with prominent scientists, which was very difficult in Germany at the time. And I give you an example. Michael Zeller is a long-standing, later on was a long-standing director of the Weizmann Institute. He was an immunochemist, and he was particularly involved in this collaboration, and he even received the Harnack Medal for his contributions to the collaboration. And I asked him why he was so involved in this, despite the fact he came from Poland, that large parts of his family perished in the concentration camps. And he answered, I tried bona fide to help German science. I think we should never forget about the past, but we also have to plan for the future. And then I asked a postdoc who was, professor, Fritz Melchers, who was a postdoc in Zeller's lab, say, how do you comment it? And I should say that Zeller even went so far as to accept as a main partner somebody who had been member of the SS. And he knew it, and he had talked with him, and he was criticized for it, but he went along. And I think nobody understood it. But I just say that went very, very far. So, and Fritz Melchers, he commented, I can tell you what helped me. We knew that we Germans had a problem internationally. We felt the aloofness towards Germany, towards Germans everywhere. To help meant to assist the younger generation in becoming accepted again internationally. Michael Zeller said this, this has to be changed, and it is to his great merit that he did it systematically. To my 6th point now, 2 more. Prerequisites. Okay.
Would you like to ask me to tell her?
Yeah. Prerequisites for successful long-standing. So, very quickly, in the beginning, clearly there were needs to overcome the international isolation and financial and material needs from the Israeli side. There was no problem of language. English was already accepted as an international language, and the young German physicists and chemists, so on, they knew to speak English. Then there was financial and political support. And this is something Sharon mentioned also yesterday. There were devoted and capable organizers. And for example, Gentner handpicked the right people. He talked to them before, and they needed to be psychologically, they needed to be aware of the situation that so many people would oppose them. And you have to imagine, at that time in the labs, people with the Auschwitz numbers were quite frequent. In the Weizmann Institute, they came from all the countries and from all the camps. So, and they need to know that. And on the other side, the Shalit and also Shalhevet Fryer, he went from lab to lab to talk to the people, and he forced nobody to participate. And if there was somebody in the lab who didn't want, they didn't get a German postdoc. So it was a very delicate thing, and without these 2 or 3 people, it might not have happened at all. One should believe it. Then there was the transition, it was also already mentioned yesterday, from a mainly politically and materially motivated collaboration into true collaboration, where each side contributes more or less equally to research of high scientific standing. And there was a transition in many cases, at least from a German-Jewish collaboration to a German-Israeli one. Now I wanted to come to humanities, so 1 minute. A comparison as much as possible. So the collaboration began much later because I understood Israeli scholars were hesitant. And possible reasons were, scientists clearly were more internationally oriented than the humanities. Nuclear physics in Heidelberg was the same as in Rehovot, especially in the case. But what about archaeology, biblical studies, the classics? Aren't they international enterprises? So what happened to them? Then departments of Germanistic and German history were founded only in the 1970s, so in any case that was late. The language problem was discussed already several times, the emotional problem related to the language, which was important in some areas of the humanities. The need for material support was much less in the humanities. And the Weizmann Institute finally did not have departments for humanities. Otherwise, they might have been also included. Here, the grants, I skipped this. Then a question which came up yesterday. So why did, concerning the comparison of the Weizmann Institute and the Hebrew University, why did scientists at the Hebrew University not initiate, natural scientists, a large-scale collaboration? And here I really think individuals matter. At the Weizmann Institute, it was very, very few people who took the lead and who were ready to make the effort to gain financial, political, and institutional support, and they finally succeeded. And also their German counterparts, by the way, they were already from the beginning, they were renowned scientists. I mentioned Jensen and also Weidenmüller. So it was not just a purely political or financial thing. So there was from the beginning also a kernel of true scientific interest. And I was asking myself, who could have done it at the Hebrew University? And the person who could have done it was Ernst David Bergman. He was internationally renowned. But he simply did not want to deal with Germany, so he would not do it. Another person who could have done it no, he could not, but he might have done. He was internationally renowned, Ladislaus Farkas from Germany, or originally from Hungary, but he died already in 1948. But he might have been a figure who might have joined this enterprise, but he was not available. And I don't know of anybody who might have done it. Genetics at the Weizmann Institute, at the Hebrew University, was very much in the German tradition. That means not at international standard anymore. It was quite backward. And so I stopped with this one. When I thought about what could be done in the humanities, or what I would do if I were to do anything, I think it would be very interesting to look into the fields in which Israeli and German scholars excel. For example, biblical studies, or the same as alttestamentliche Studien in German. And I talked to a scholar at Ben Gurion University. She is also internationally renowned, and she has contacts to collaboration with German scholars for many years or decades even, starting in Heidelberg, going to Göttingen because she is a Septuagint researcher, and later on Munich. And she said it was purely scholarly interest because the Germans are the best in that field. And so this developed along this, which does not mean that other questions didn't come up. For example, the camps around Munich had to be visited and something like that. But it was basically a scholarly, purely scholarly integration. And in Middle Eastern archaeology, I also know that there is a huge interest. I don't know when it started, because, first of all, scholars on both sides were very, very renowned. And secondly, there was a clear need from the Israeli side, because simply they cannot dig in Arabic countries. So they are dependent on German scholars who have 2 passports and come, and every year they meet at conferences, either in Israel or in Germany, to discuss their findings. And I find it a very, very fascinating project. And also Islamic history, here the president of the Hebrew University, he has strong connections with Germany in the field of Islamic history. The same, there are good scholars in both fields. Another topic certainly would be interesting, the role of teachers who were expelled from Germany. Did they build schools of German tradition? And when did, let's say, this go into context to Germany again, to context to Germany again, despite the emotional aspect which Professor Motzkin mentioned yesterday, and which certainly took a lot of time. So I skip it. Thank you very much.